Suzanne was already awake, her ice-blue eyes looking down at him. "Morning," she said, greeting him. "Hungry?" "Sure," Alan responded. "What would you like?" she asked. "Celery," Alan replied. "Why that?" she asked, chuckling. "Gets your strength up after sex. Something Jack Kennedy used." "The president?" she asked, as Alan nodded. "How do you know that?" "My grandfather told me. He hung out with him," Alan answered, feeling sufficiently relaxed to start talking about his family. "Well, I'm not sure about the celery," she said, rising naked from the bed, "but I'll find something." Just as she was about to get out of bed, she stopped and pointed to his hip. "What's that about?" "Oh, nothing," Alan responded, pulling the sheet over him. "No, I saw it. You have 14 tattooed on you." "Yeah, you're right. It's my lucky number. I just have myself branded." "I like it. I'm into numerology, too," she said, as she put on her clothes. It was only after she left that Alan threw off his sheet and gazed down at his tattoo. It had been there for so long that sometimes he would forget about its existence. 14 wasn't his lucky number. It was the opposite. That was the age at which Alan's life had fallen apart. Before that point, his life had seemed almost enchanted, with his beautiful actress mother and celebrated director father living happily together. But after that year, Alan's life had come crashing down. His dad's close friend, the movie star Susan Strasser, had committed suicide. And that, for some reason, had unhinged his dad, triggering a cocaine-fueled spiral downward. At the same time, his mother began taking longer and longer trips away, until his parents finally divorced. Alan's life as well was going downhill. He had gotten thrown out of one prep school after another. He'd wanted to get thrown out, that was the whole point. He'd wanted to show that he was drowning. But both his parents were too preoccupied with their own demons to help. So one Saturday night, Alan made a pilgrimage down to a tattoo parlor in Lower Manhattan. It was his own form of protest, proclaiming that something had gone very, very wrong with his family. And shortly after that, his grandfather rescued him, taking on the role of mother and father. Alan pulled his boxer shorts over his hip. He was tired of reliving his family's breakdown. He walked over to the window and stared down at the tooth totem across the street from his lodging. The tooth totem was used by the townspeople to relieve their toothaches. They would hammer nails into it, believing that this would relieve their pains. Alan had heard that underneath the 100 pounds of nails outside was the gilded image of Vaishya Dev, the god of toothaches, but all he could make out was a 5-foot-high tugboat-shaped object covered with nails. Half an hour later, Suzanne returned with a shopping bag full of food. Alan looked in amusement as she set out their picnic: Golden Star beer, rice, paneer, beans, and chapatis. "No celery, but this should get you pumped up," she said with a strange smile. After they had finished, she looked intently at him and asked, "Do you know what red tantric is?" Tantric, something to do with sculpture?" Alan replied, thinking back to some distant Harvard art class. "It's the real sex, It was the reason I was attracted to you." "Well, that's good," Alan replied, not knowing what else to say. "First we'll smoke, and then we'll do it," she instructed. Suzanne then brought out a small brass pipe and popped a large chunk of hashish into it and lit it. "Smoke it," she said, trying to keep the vapors in her lungs. Alan reluctantly joined in, and within a few minutes they were both stoned. "Now you'll see what my teacher showed me." With that, she took out her lipstick, daubing a red mark in the middle of her forehead. Then she inscribed a circle on the wood floor around them. "This is the sacred circle. We stay inside it during the tantric, okay?" "What's this all about?" Alan asked, his irritability rising above his drug stupor. "This is the sex of the gods," she said, disrobing. "Get into it, Alan. Take your clothes off." "All right," Alan muttered, not enjoying at all being bossed around. What is this? Shh, Suzanne gestured, spreading her legs before him. Come, Alan. I am the goddess, she whispered, gesturing for him to come closer and closer. Look into my eyes. Alan stared into those cold blue marbles, while his erection stood like a small totem between the two of them. Look deep, she intoned hypnotically. The more he looked, the angrier he got. Gaze, she demanded. Alan stared into her eyes and began to panic. He wanted to run and flee, but his body felt bolted to the floor. As the minutes wore on, her features began to change. He saw cruelty in her eyes and contempt in her lips. She's a witch, Alan's mind shrieked. His muscles tightened, his erection flagged, and with all the energy he could muster, he shouted, Forget it! Forget it! Forget it! He raved, standing up and stepping out of her precious circle. Sit down! Suzanne shouted, her face red with fury. Forget it! I'm not some sort of lab rat! Alan exclaimed, pulling on his pants. For a few moments, she said nothing, but a look of utter derision showed in her face. You are such a typical American, so afraid of little me. I should have known better. All you Americans are the same. Conquer, conquer, conquer. That's all you know. Alan shrugged his shoulders, picking up his passport and wallet. You picked the wrong rat, Alan said, and in the next moment, he was out the door. Alan walked the streets of Kathmandu, hoping that Suzanne would leave his place soon. But by early afternoon, the rains had started again, and Alan returned to his apartment. Suzanne had gone, but had left a note on his bed. He took it over to the window and read the message. Alan, you don't deserve my courtesy, it began. Nevertheless, I am a spiritual person, so I will give it to you. You are too afraid. See my teacher. He will show you how to push the darkness away. His name is Rishi Suraj, and he lives in Rishikesh. Ciao, Suzanne. Alan angrily balled the paper together, taking a foul shot at the metal wastebasket. Ciao back at you, Alan said, with a mixture of anger and sadness. That night, Alan had one of those experiences that he had traveled around the world to avoid. As he slept, he dreamt that a huge cobra was towering over him, striking him again and again as he shrieked with pain. Alan woke up in a cold sweat, hearing all manner of shouts and pounding coming from the walls to each side of him. Would you shut up? Screamed one man, while the same sentiment was yelled at him in French. Alan glanced feverishly around the room. Where is it? Where am I? But then he remembered. Kathmandu, the party, Suzanne. He threw off his sweat-drenched sheet and sat motionless on the bed for several minutes. In his gut, Alan knew what had happened had been more than a dream. But what was it? He had had his share of nightmares, but these attacks were different. A nightmare was something you woke up from, thanking God that you were no longer in it. But what Alan had experienced stayed with him all the time, just sometimes in a more muted form. Alan glumly assessed his situation. Either he was going mad, or there was really something attacking him. Not sure which was worse, Alan shook his head, feeling totally lost. He had tried hiding, tried numbing his senses, tried losing himself in sex. All were futile. Alan no longer felt famous or rich or sure of anything. He walked over to the wastebasket, like a dead man, and straightened out the note that he had tossed away hours before. Was this a message from God or the Indian Tourist Board, he wondered. In any case, it was the only card left. Rishikesh, Alan muttered to himself, feeling that it was just another meaningless destination in his surreal life.